Welcome, my sisters and brothers. Let the teaching and learning begin.
So many times, one of the things that we've been able to do with the White Dress Project is speak on Capitol Hill. And I cannot tell you how many legislators have asked me, so Tanika, does anyone die from fibroids? And in that awkward moment when I want to argue, and I have to remain my composure, I say that I would argue that every child that a woman has lost due to fibroids is that. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Every time that I'm going to get emotional about this, but every time that I have had to have a transfusion, not knowing whose blood is coming into me, what type of blood, just these things that I don't know as a doctor and that I fear as a patient, is harmful. I would argue that the fact that women write us every day telling us about their sisters, their friends, who have died on the operation table after a myomectomy. And granted, you know, there are people dying every day. There are multiple ways to die. But you can imagine that when I hear that question from legislators, how troubling that is to me as a patient advocate. The fibroids suffocated her twins, and basically there was not enough room in the inn for everybody to be in her uterus. Then her worst nightmare happened again. She lost a second set of twins at the age of 30, and I was born 2 years after that. After years of excessive bleeding, embarrassing moments, infertility, the idea of having 6 children was quickly fading for her, and the reality of motherhood was only me. So now, don't get me wrong, I was her miracle baby, and the hope of having children was restored with me. If you hear my mother's version of this story, she'll tell you that she did get her 6 children. She lost the 4, she had me, and then she adopted a little girl at 3 months old. So all of that to say that the patient story is so important.
We have to change that level of acceptability. That level of exhaustion should not be our baseline. That should not be an acceptable starting place of where we exist on a day-to-day basis just because that's where our siblings exist, or our aunts, or our moms, or our neighbors. It's that sense, exactly what you said, that why would I go to the doctor when this is the period I have, this is the period my mom had, this is the period my sisters have, my aunties have, my neighbors have, so what's bad? And it's not even enough for me as a physician to ask patients anymore, are your periods normal, or are they heavy? Because they're going to say, no, they're normal. Doesn't everybody use 20 tampons and 20 maxi pads a day? And it's not until I get the patient's blood test and I see her hemoglobin of 5, and I'm just like, then I have chest pain. I'm trying to track the patient down to make sure that, she hasn't passed out in the hallway on her way home. And she's like, Dr. Marge, I got your 47 messages, I'm fine. Why are you so concerned? And I'm like, you're very, very anemic. You need to come in and get a blood transfusion. And I typically I'm not coming back to the hospital. We have an appointment in a month. I'll see you then. Who I am today is who I was yesterday and last week and the week before. I was tired then. I'm tired now. I'll be tired when I come see you, and we can work it out then. So,
every time that I get up from a chair, and this may be TMI, but every time I get up from a chair, I look at the chair, period on or not. I look at the chair just to make sure that there's nothing on the seat, or I haven't, nothing is secreting that's not supposed to be secreting. Even within this epidemic, we also need to talk about the mental health impact that it can have.
I'm tired, emotional, and depressed. All of this has caused me to be depressed, and it makes me feel inadequate. Women with fibroids, almost all of them have some level of psychological distress. Many of them, half of them feel helpless. About a third of them have a negative body image and a negative feeling toward sexuality, and a quarter of them feel a lack of support from family, from the healthcare system, all the way around.
Like, hey girlfriend, like how many pads are you changing? Like, you know, we're not having those conversations. And you tend to think that, you know, the way you bleed and what happens is just normal. Like, I didn't know that my period was not supposed to be clotting. Like, I just thought that's what it was because it had always been that way. So yeah, I would love to do that. So let's make it happen.
I have an aunt right now who is not speaking to me because I won't have a hysterectomy. She feels like I'm causing the family stress just by not having it. I think there's an aspect to having fibroids, and this is another subject, that some women feel it is a secret topic and you don't discuss it until you have had the surgery. I think there needs to be more communication so women feel comfortable just to talk about it. We have genes that are the recipes and instructions for collagen, okay? So they tell the cells to make collagen, and that's, if you can imagine, you know, a little accountant whose job is to go say, you know, if there's a bunch of factories in your cells, and there's one accountant or there's many accountants that go around and say, make collagen, make collagen, make collagen. And in fibroids, there's a whole bunch of them that's saying make collagen, make collagen, make collagen, make collagen. Now what the microRNA does is the person with the big hammer that says, be quiet, accountant, be quiet, accountant, don't tell anybody you make collagen anymore. And there's a different accountant for every little protein and every little gene that, you know, or most of the proteins and the genes that we make. So there's certainly, you know, some accountants that go around and say, make collagen, make collagen, make collagen. And then there's a microRNA called microRNA 29, that family, which appears to be, you know, have the big hammer to hit those accountants on the head. So if we can figure out a way to, you know, selectively tell the cells and fibroids not, you know, to have some more of those guys with hammers in there beating the collagen guys down, we can hopefully keep those fibroids from growing. Now, you know, will that keep fibroids from starting? Maybe, maybe not. But it certainly can keep them from growing to a size, potentially, that where they become problematic. And there's a difference between having a fibroid the size of a pea or a marble and having a fibroid the size of a watermelon, which many of us, you know what that's like as well, or a cantaloupe. So I think that's another potential area of opportunity.
So one of the questions that you probably asked yourself is that if this is the situation here of fibroids, why is it only in the uterus? Right? What's up with that? And the answer is that the uterus is the coolest organ in the whole body. And the reason it's so amazing is that we're all here because the uterus gave us home for 9 months, right? Or thereabouts. And it went from this to that and back again. All right? And again, if the prostate went from this, there'd be more research. If you have a cell and you have the stuff around the cell, if the stuff around the cell is stiff, the cell has to be stiff. Because if the cell's not stiff, the stuff around the cell will crush it. So in a fibroid cell, there has to be a relationship, and all the cells in our body are like this, where there's an extracellular matrix and an intracellular process, and it has to be balanced. Because the fibroids do have an increased and altered extracellular matrix, we know mechanical signaling is altered, and we think that this is a feed-forward situation of growth. Now, I just went over 10 years in 10 minutes, but it's complex, and hopefully I haven't lost you at this point. You're sort of with me on this.
Black women were 2.5 times more likely to have a complication after a myomectomy than white women. But then we looked at the differences in uterine size, number of fibroids, and other diseases, and we adjusted for that statistically. And when you did that, the complication rates weren't any different by race. So the reason that black women were more likely to have complications after treatment wasn't for the most part, I mean, it doesn't completely exclude it, but much of it was explained by the fact that they had bigger fibroids and it was more difficult to treat them. And we saw the same thing in hysterectomy. When we didn't adjust for all the different things that might affect the outcomes, black women were twice as likely to have a complication, but that went away when we adjusted for it. The only demographic group that is overrepresented in active duty military compared to the civilian world is African American women. And so health conditions that affect African American women have a direct effect on not only the cost of healthcare in the military, but actual military readiness. And the Department of Defense has actually done a study looking at the cost to them, not only of treating fibroids, but of time lost from duty because of this. And so part of our broad strategy of getting the DoD involved was that as things move along, it's being able to point to people in a position to fund things, that there's not only a important women's health component of this, but there's a direct military readiness aspect of this.
So when you compare all those three in the middle options, meaning the MRI focused ultrasound, the embolization, and now this radiofrequency ablation, the advantages of the MRI focused ultrasound are with regard to pain afterwards and how quickly can you go back to your normal activities. The biggest limitation there would be cost, not covering by the insurance, and also the duration of the procedure. So it can take up to 4 hours. And in being in that position, the woman cannot move, because once you get a map of where you're going to treat, you just can't move. So that is kind of like the biggest challenge with that. With the embolization, it's a little bit quicker. So it takes anywhere from 45 to a couple of hours to treat, depending on how many fibroids you have.
I think patient education and patient empowerment is key, because if you've done your homework, and that doesn't mean I went and read a blog, that doesn't mean I talked to, my Aunt Annie, who, had her fibroids treated 30 years ago, or even my neighbor who had her fibroids treated last week. But if you really educate yourself about what the options are, you can go to your doctor and say, can you tell me about the options? I understand that uterine artery embolization, hysterectomy, and myomectomy are 3 major options. Can you tell me why you would or would not recommend those for me?
The entire uterus is prone to develop fibroid anywhere. There are certain areas where we seem to have more fibroids than in other areas, but we really have no way of telling if it's the same thing that comes back or if it's something next to it. So in general, I would just work under the assumption there's always a chance of getting fibroids as long as you have a uterus. Right. And I agree with Jim, what we want to do is the ones that cause problems, we want to either prevent them from causing problems, decrease the problems, prevent a surgery, trying to postpone invasive procedure. I think that's kind of where the goal line is of what we want to reach in order to increase the quality of life for these women.
Many women leave doctors' offices with the question, what does this grapefruit-sized fibroid mean? Using different words or ways to describe fibroids will not stop a woman's bleeding, obviously, or make her pain go away, but it can impact the way she feels about the situation and influence how she addresses her symptoms. Gynecologists and ultrasound reports usually describe the size of fibroids using centimeters, and it's a measurement that some would argue many people don't know how to compare. Does that mean it's bad or is it good? As physicians, I think it's important to be cognizant of the role you are playing in articulating the severity of this epidemic. I've heard many stories from women not knowing if their grapefruit-sized fibroids are something they should worry about, When a woman hears that her uterus is carrying the weight of a 5-month fetus or contains a grapefruit-sized tumor, her anxiety is bound to increase, making thoughtful decision more difficult, in my opinion. We also don't know if our intramural, submucosal, subserosal, pedunculated fibroids are the ones wreaking havoc or not. Just tell me, are these the ones that are making me look pregnant?
How can you convince your physician who has been trained in a traditional sense to take the clinical data you said and then tell, like your slides presented, this is the option you have. This is based on clinical evidence without having to interject in him, well, you don't want that option, or you, like you were saying, the patient has to be their own voice and say, I don't want that, I want to keep my organ. Even if they don't want children. Some women say that even if they don't want kids, they just don't feel natural without their uterus. So how do you have that conversation, even though he may personally be fine with what you're proposing, how do you make that dialogue?
So the way I look at it is no more playing Mr. Nice Guy. We've got to play like they do. We've got to be outlandish in our message. Invest in marketing of real stories with real impact on a woman's career, her family, and her mental health.
Is that the company is invested in the well-being of the members and the community. And that just gives some background as to why we don't take lightly the process of, determining coverage, but it's a very detailed, intense, and thorough evaluation that goes into determining coverage for not only new technologies, but established technologies that are being used in new ways. Your insurance policy is your contract with the insurance company that says this is what we cover. So an example of that, and there's either something's covered or it's not. So if I wanted to go, I'm a huge sports fan in the area, dye my hair blue. I won't say which blue, which tone blue, but and I want to go and get that done. My health insurance policy is not going to cover that. That is not a health benefit in my contract with them, and so as much as I would love to have it done or may benefit me, that's just not within the realm. So that's the first level of review, and there's not really a clinical determination that goes along with that. That's where the benefits are reviewed. So how are the reimbursements determined? So there's certain influences that that guide our medical policy team in developing medical policies and criteria that are used to determine coverage. And they are often dictated by the legislature. So if there are federal mandates, we have to have a policy on how we are going to review and determine coverage for federally mandated services, as well as state mandates. Again, there's this benefit contract that I talked about that also dictates what's covered. And then we have medical necessity and then some other. So if ACOG puts out a recommendation of a new standard of care guideline, then we have to review that and come up with a coverage determination within a certain time frame. So we're always on the lookout for the different medical specialties and what they're recommending as current standard of care. And we also look towards external providers in the community. So we have consulting groups that we rely on and advisory groups as well, that if there's a new technology, let's say we're getting a lot of requests for a new technology that we don't know much about, we have providers and clinicians in the area in certain specialties that we may reach out to, say we'll reach out to orthopedic community to help identify the evidence and the data and the research that's out there that we need to look into to help determine our policies. So how can you find the medical policies? So it's not a big secret. If you have a condition or a intervention or a procedure that you're curious, what are the criteria? If your provider wants to use a certain technology, let's say uterine artery embolization, then they can go to a public website. You can go there and you can enter it in and pull up and find out what our coverage criteria are. So in regards to uterine fibroids, we cover many therapies, and not all of these are, reviewed as far as with the physicians. There are standard covered procedures or interventions, so the basic surgical interventions, hysterectomy, myomectomy, those are covered. Hormonal therapies, uterine artery embolization is one of the minimally invasive techniques that is covered. But then as some of the techniques that were discussed by the colleagues here earlier today, do fall under the investigational category. So one being the MRI-guided ultrasound and the some of the myolysis techniques. And so what does investigational mean? So we have our researchers in the room, and they're doing great work and showing good evidence towards these technologies. But from an insurance standpoint, there's a high level of expectations for new technologies regarding safety, data information, long-term impacts, health outcomes, as well as how does it compare to conventional treatments, because at the end of the day, we need to understand that the new technology has not only a health benefit, but also a cost benefit. If it's investigational, it's not currently covered. And usually the reasons why are that we are requiring that the procedures or supplies be approved by organizations such as the FDA, so that's one requirement. There has to be sufficient conclusive medical and scientific evidence to allow the plan to even evaluate the therapy. And usually that's a minimum of 2 peer-reviewed published literature, regarding the technology. And so it's good to hear that a lot of that work is going on with some of these newer minimally invasive techniques for uterine fibroids, so that we can get the information we need so that we can determine and shift them over from investigational to covered criteria. Several ways to request review. This can happen externally through the website. You can access the medical policy review committees online, or if you're a network provider, there's a provider portal where you can submit your data, submit your research studies, submit your publications, and we will review that. When I reached out to our medical policy committee, the most important avenue, however, is this Blue Cross Blue Shield Association Evidence Street. So this is, like I said, the larger umbrella where anyone can go on, register, doesn't cost anything, and have a place to submit your data, submit your publications, submit your case studies. And this is a national, this is going to be nationwide review of all the literature on a particular technology or subject, and it's reviewed regularly through that means. And then that's then trickled down to kind of the local plans. That there are specific mandates in specific states. And so there's federal mandates that say, let's say, preventive services must be covered if you have an ACA compliant plan. So things like your routine mammogram or your pap smear, those things are considered preventive. Your annual well child check or well woman visit, those things are federally mandated that they must be covered. So whether you have a Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina plan or a Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina plan, it has to be covered. But then you have also mandates from the state level where if there is no, where the state may say this must be covered. And so that can vary state to state.
Am I right to say that anybody can go on to this evidence street and file? I mean, like I could see an advocacy group, like the White Dress Project, deciding to file something nationwide for a certain treatment and say, here's the data, here's all the clinical trials, blah, 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 blah. I mean, a drug company could do it, but what you're saying is anybody can do this, is what you're saying.
Right.
So we have an avenue right there,
Right.
which I didn't know about. But I think what I want to say to you before it's now lunchtime, we all have a responsibility, every single one of us, to know about these issues, to know about what our own health care insurance covers, and to know what it covers for other people. And certainly now, when Congress is debating their plan up there, it really behooves us to really understand it. And a lot of people have criticized our system because what has happened, because when we have insurance, we don't pay attention to what the cost is to us as individuals necessarily. We just assume, oh yeah, if we get sick, we're going to get it paid for. And then we get a bill from the hospital and it doesn't pay for half of it, and so we go, oh wow. But I mean, I think that's a critical thing. And what's happening to young people is, you want a bill that's not too expensive right now. So you want to get the cheapest kind of insurance there is, and it may not pay for everything, and it certainly may not pay for preventative care. But I think that we really all need to ask ourselves questions about what it is that we're getting.
I don't understand why some of the doctors in this room, Dr. Taylor specifically, and Dr. Leppert and Dr. Seekers, why aren't you on GMA talking about this? Why aren't they being booked on the Today Show, talking about how the research they're doing can change women's lives? It's newsworthy. But we have to meet at the intersection of sexy, creative, innovative, and truth.
That diseases that were killing thousands of women every year, like breast cancer or ovarian cancer, are those that disproportionately affect minorities, such as sickle cell anemia, were not being researched properly. As a result, scientists and government officials were getting a skewed picture of a drug's effectiveness and safety.
Because you're going to say, why do we have to do all these studies, blah, 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 blah. And it's important not to do away with this sort of system. Phase 1 trial is to test a new drug on a small group of patients for safety, safe dose range, and discover side effects. And every procedure, every drug has side effects, and physicians have to know what they are. You just don't go out and do it. Phase 2 is you can do the drug given to a large group for effectiveness and safety. And all these things are done in conjunction with the FDA. You have to go and talk with them and get licensed to do new drug studies. Phase 3 is to do a larger group. It's a randomized trial because you're going to be monitoring it and compare it either to common treatments or to, just a placebo or whatever, because you want to collect more information about the safe treatment regimen. And all of these kinds of procedures and trials take time. Phase 4 trial is after the drug is on the market, and you're going to do post-marketing information. But these are drugs and other procedures that are in the pipeline that are going to be available to patients soon. Okay? These are ongoing studies that were in clinicaltrials.gov, and there's one at the very end, valaprisan, which is not in our database because it's being done in Germany, and it's going to be a phase 3 that's going to start in June 2017. But as you can see, they have various completion dates. Now, we know that this particular procedure destroys cells and some of the cellular matrix proteins. There's going to be recurrence if some of the cells remain, and probably if a little bit of the collagen remains too, because of the fact that it's going to put pressure on cells around it. Okay, so I want everyone to understand that we're making progress in all the treatment of fibroids. Partly, I think, because we're beginning to understand more about the basic science of the disease. Clinical trials are in progress, and they're going to be finished soon. And we need further studies, such as the COMPARE-UF, to really tell which ones of these new drugs are going to be helpful for patients. I also strongly would urge all of us to think about ways in which we can combine these treatments. You know, we're successful in treating cancer because we have several drug regimens. We don't just use one drug. And I really believe that that's what we're going to have to do with fibroids. We're going to have begin to have regimens where we say, well, we're going to start out with this, then we're going to maybe combine it with radiofrequency or collagenase or focus ultra or whatever, you know, and then we're going to move down the line.
Medical devices, to my efforts dedicating the first $500 million in federal funds to breast cancer research at the NIH, none of these victories happened in a vacuum. If you'll join me in never taking no for an answer, it's time to make reasonable changes to help protect patients and give them the information that could help save lives.